my previous lecture, we discussed about homeostasis, and in this lecture, we are going to learn about homeostasis and how it regulates body functions in a bit more detail. I'll be focusing mostly on homeostasis at body level, and later you'll learn more about homeostasis at cellular level. Let me go back to the slide which I ended my previous lecture. So cells make up body systems. Body systems maintain homeostasis, and homeostasis is essential for the survival of cells. I'm sure you are aware that 60% of the human body is made of organ systems in our body in maintaining homeostasis, and also about the neuronal and endocrine control of homeostasis. Before that, what are homeostatically regulated functions in our body? There are many. Let me highlight have slightly lesser water content compared to males, which is around 55%. Our body fluid volume should be female body has at a constant level to male. Volume should not be too much, should not be too little. Elderly have and lesser body water content compared to young adults, which is about 55%. Blood glucose levels, temperature, and concentration of electrolytes, blood pressure. The pH should be maintained in a constant range, and adequate nutrients, also concentration of waste products in our body, because accumulation of waste products result in toxic effects. The waste products should be adequately eliminated from our body. Now let's look into the role of different body systems in maintaining homeostasis. So the nervous system receives signals from the external environment and generates electrical currents or impulses to the other organs. And also it's important in higher functions such as memory. The respiratory system obtains oxygen from the external environment and excretes carbon dioxide. Also, it's important in regulating the body pH by regulating the carbon dioxide concentration, because carbon dioxide is an important determinant of the pH of the body. The gastrointestinal system obtains water and nutrients from the external environment and also eliminates feces from the body. The renal system is important in many homeostatic functions, including regulating the volume, electrolytes, and pH in the internal environment, and the toxic products are excreted in urine. The endocrine system regulates the body functions through hormones. The integumentary system or the skin serves as a protective barrier which prevents external organisms entering the body and keeps the fluid inside the body. And it's also important in regulating body temperature. The immune system defends against foreign invaders and cancer cells. The musculoskeletal system aids the body movements. The circulatory system plays an important role transporting nutrients, oxygen, carbon dioxide, waste products, and hormones. So it interconnects with all the other systems. The nervous system and endocrine system are important because they signal to regulate the functions of the other organ systems. Okay. Now let's look into a practical situation. Misha is very hungry after a busy day and consumes a larger meal than usual. What homeostatically regulated functions will be affected after a heavy meal? So, after a heavy meal, there will be a load of salts. So, the electrolytes will be deranged, and blood sugar will be deranged, and the body fluid levels will be affected. So, what body systems are predominantly involved? The digestive system, renal system, and endocrine system. So these systems will work together to ensure that the internal environment is not significantly changed and the steady state is maintained. Now, let's look into how homeostatic control systems operate in the body, and we learn another fundamental principle on negative and positive feedback control. Let me introduce this term homeostatically controlled system. So, they are functionally interconnected network of body components that operate to maintain a given factor in the internal environment at a relatively constant level. So, in my earlier lecture, we discussed that the temperature in the body is tightly regulated, and we discussed that there are many variables in our body which are tightly regulated. Now, we'll look into how this happens. So, in our body, if there's change in a particular variable in the internal environment from a given value, or what we call a set point, it should be detected, and the information should be integrated on what change has happened, and there should be changes made to the internal environment in order to restore the deranged variable. So, this is detected. Changes to the set point is detected by what's called a sensor. And the information is sent to other organs or systems which act as integrators or controllers, and they send signals to what's called an effector to make changes. Now, let me use an analogy to explain this better. This is a picture of a lake. So, the river flows water into the lake, and the excess water is removed by the spillways. In addition, rain adds water to the lake, and evaporation removes water. So, if we look at it in a way of a homeostatically controlled system, there's a steady state balance, that is, the water level in the lake is maintained constant by keeping the inflow equal to the outflow. So, the set point here is the optimum water level, and changes to the set point or the water level is detected by depth measurement. So, there are indicators which will measure the depth of the water in the lake. So, when there are changes to the water level, it makes changes or sends signals to the spillways. So, spillways are the controller here. So, input by the river or by the rain or the evaporative losses cannot be controlled. So, what we can control is the dam outflow. Subsequently, there will be changes made by the dam operator to control the spillways. So, the dam operator here acts as the effector. In keeping with the dam and lake analogy, consider the maintenance of a steady state water balance in humans. The water intake per day is around 2000 milliliters, but this can be highly variable. In addition, water is produced by cellular metabolism, which is around 200 milliliters per day. Most of the water is excreted by urine, and part is lost as insensible water loss. So, insensible water loss is the water loss through skin and lungs, which comes to around 700 milliliters per day. But insensible water loss through skin does not include sweat. So, sweating happens when the weather conditions are warm, but the insensible water loss happens even in cold conditions. So, in addition to urine and insensible water losses, water is lost through feces and sweat as well. So, in human body, control mechanisms ensure intake and the output is balanced so that the body water content is at a steady state balance. Now, let's look into how this process happens exactly. So, you will learn more details about it later, but let me just use this as an example to illustrate how the homeostatic processes operate in our body. So when there's a reduction to the body water content, what happens is the extracellular fluid osmolarity will go up. This is because then the concentration of substances will go up due to reduced water content. So there will be changes into the set point which is sensed by the hypothalamus. And the brain will generate and transmit signals to the thirst center and the posterior pituitary. So what the thirst center does is it will stimulate the thirst response, and the posterior pituitary will synthesize a hormone called the antidiuretic hormone. So stimulation in thirst will lead to increased water intake, and when the antidiuretic hormone is secreted, there is water retention because it will promote more water reabsorption in the kidney. Don't worry about the details of these processes. You learn all that as we go on. So what will happen is these will lead to dilution of the extracellular fluid and restoration of the body water content. The sensor here is the hypothalamus, and it sends signals to the controller or the integrator, which is the thirst center and the posterior pituitary, and the effectors are the thirst mechanism and the antidiuretic hormone. So homeostatic controls can be intrinsic or can be controlled locally or body-wide, which is extrinsic control. If I use an analogy to explain, intrinsic control is an individual having a problem, solving the problem themselves. And extrinsic control is if the problem is a bigger problem or it affects the others as well, multiple parties like the family members, friends getting together to help the individual solve the problem. So intrinsic control is inherent to a particular organ system. For example, in an exercising skeletal muscle, oxygen will be used rapidly and it will reduce the muscle oxygen concentration, and local chemicals will be released, and the chemicals will act on the blood vessels to dilate the blood vessels, and it will increase the blood flow to the organ, and it will provide more oxygen to the tissues. And when it comes to extrinsic control permits coordinated regulation of several organs towards a common goal. For example, if there's a drop in blood pressure, the nervous system will act on blood vessels and the heart to increase the blood pressure and bring the blood pressure to normal. So here, multiple systems, circulatory system, nervous system are involved. So it's an example of extrinsic control. So the extrinsic responses act as what's called feedback loops to ensure the response is just right. And it's not too much and not too little because these are complex mechanisms. They are tightly regulated. The nervous and endocrine system leads to overall control of homeostatic control systems of the body. So, they help to bring about the action of various organ systems together nicely to act towards a common goal. Let's look into how feedback system operates. So, feedback system operates in loops. When a control variable is deranged, it is measured by the sensor, which sends inputs to the integrator, and then the integrator will send signals to the effector, which will lead to changes in the control variable. So once the changes occur in the control variable, the signals are sent again to the sensor that the changes have occurred. So this is what is a feedback loop. Feedback loop. One is negative feedback loops and we have positive feedback loops. Most feedback loops in our body are negative feedback loops and they act as the backbone of homeostasis. Let's look into a negative feedback loop. So when there is deviation in a control variable, it's detected by the sensor. It sends signals to the integrator, and integrator sends instructions to the effector to make certain changes. So when these changes occur, the control variable will return back to normal. And now what happens is this will in fact send signals to the sensor, right, that the variable has returned back to normal and to stop the downward response. If we look into a practical example, if there's a fall in body temperature, it's detected by nerve endings, nerve cells, and it sends signals to the temperature control centers, which will send signals to various organs. For example, it sends signals to muscles to cause shivering, right? So these responses will bring back the deranged variable, that is the temperature, to normal. And once the temperature has normalized, signals will be sent to the sensors that the body temperature has normalized, and it will stop sending further signals to the other organ, the integrators and the effectors. So the effect will be terminated. So in other words, negative feedback regulates the output in a way that the change is stopped or resisted. But when it comes to positive feedback, the difference is it will augment the change or produce changes in the same direction as the initial disturbance. So an example is oxytocin released during labor. We look into the example to understand this process better. So during childbirth, oxytocin is released by the pituitary gland and it's carried in the bloodstream to the uterus. And oxytocin stimulates uterine contractions to push the baby out towards the cervix and for the baby to be delivered. So when the baby is pushed towards the cervix, the nerves in the cervix will generate and transmit signals to the brain to release more oxytocin. So there will be release of more oxytocin, and the contractions of the uterus and the pushing effect of the muscle will be more and more. So this process will be ongoing until the baby is expelled. So this is how a positive feedback loop occurs and operates. It facilitates the change in the same direction. So try to find out an example of another positive feedback effect in the human body. There are not many positive feedback loops or positive feedback effects in the human body, and most feedback loops are actually negative feedback loops. So next, we'll be looking into the role of genes in the homeostatic process. So this is just an outline of the genes in the homeostatic process. The genetic makeup of an individual determines one's individual characteristics and set points. So, set points of various parameters are not universal. There are individual variations and variations depending on ethnicity. In addition, genes play an important role by protein synthesis. So you will learn later how genes contribute and regulate protein synthesis. In certain genetic diseases, there are proteins that are not synthesized, which leads to homeostatic imbalances. Coming into the final objective is to identify the link between the disruption of homeostatic processes and diseases. So, disruption of homeostasis can lead to illness and death. Let me illustrate how disruption of homeostasis leads to disease. Our blood glucose levels are maintained at a constant range, as we learned before. If a person consumes a high calorie or a meal containing a lot of sugar, the blood glucose content will go up and insulin will be secreted from the pancreas. Insulin will stimulate glucose uptake by cells and also glucose uptake by liver to synthesize glycogen. This will bring the blood glucose levels to normal. In those who have diabetes, insulin is not synthesized. So there will not be uptake of glucose by cells. So the blood glucose levels will not be regulated. So in an individual with diabetes, the blood glucose levels will go up after a heavy meal, but it will not be normalized. So in diabetes, what happens is there's constantly high glucose levels in the blood, and the danger is the blood glucose levels can damage organs such as the blood vessels, kidney, heart and eyes. So this is an example how disruption of glucose homeostasis leads to disease. And let me introduce you to a term pathophysiology. So earlier in my previous lecture, I explained what physiology is. So pathophysiology is altered physiology or abnormal functioning of the body. Now let's look into a practical example on how disruption of homeostatic process leads to disease and complications. Maya is an 18-year-old university student and she developed stomach flu upon returning from an overseas trip. She vomits large amount of stomach contents that contain gastric acid. She is unable to drink adequate amounts of fluid. What homeostatically regulated functions are likely to be disrupted? So pause the video and give it some thought. These are a list of homeostatically regulated functions in our body, which we discussed earlier. So in this person, so she's vomiting a large amounts of stomach contents, right, and not drinking enough. So the body fluid volume is going to be low. And also when an individual vomits or has diarrhea, they lose large content of electrolytes. So the electrolytes are likely to be deranged. And in vomiting, right, the example illustrates that the vomitus contains gastric acid. So when a person loses gastric acid, the pH of the body is likely to be disrupted. And when an individual loses a lot of fluid, the blood pressure is going to be low. And also a person unable to eat and drink adequately will have derangements in the blood glucose levels, that the blood glucose level will be low. So we have covered these objectives of the lecture. We've learned about homeostatically controlled systems, feedback loops, and genetic control of homeostasis, and the link between disruption of homeostatic process and diseases. So it's extremely important for you to understand the link between the disruption of homeostasis and disease. And when you learn about disease processes, always try to form the link of disrupted homeostasis leading to these conditions. You can approach me if you have any questions. Thank you.